All right, I think we'll go get started. I want to thank everybody for joining today's Red Talk webinar. Before we get started, I did just want to go over a few housekeeping items. Please make sure you stay on mute throughout the duration of the webinar. If you have a question, enter it into the chat function within WebEx and we'll make sure to get it answered. Once the webinar concludes, we do have a short survey that we ask that you please complete, just providing some feedback on your experience about today's discussion. So with that being said, I will pass it over to Brandon Kyer, Field CTO here at Red 8.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you everybody who's joined. Appreciate it. As Yvette said, I'm the Field CTO for Red 8. I'd also like to welcome my cohort on this and the gentleman who honestly most of us, including myself, have come to hear, which is Ben Johnson, who is the Field CTO for Digital Shadows. I've had the pleasure to know Ben for probably going on about 12, maybe even 15 years now. And have known him for his security prowess that entire time. And so I'm really excited to welcome him and his company, Digital Shadows. We'll make this intro as short and sweet as we can, kind of let everybody know who's talking and what we're talking about, and then hopefully open it up for discussion. So Yvette, please interrupt as questions come into chat. We're happy to go ahead and jump on those in real time, and either one of us will respond as well as we can. So again, my name's Brandon Kyer. I come from primarily a infrastructure background. I like to think that most infrastructure people really don't know anything about security, even though we all want to pretend to. We tend to think about security more in terms of tools, like what is a data loss prevention tool, or do we have Palo Alto? And I think security is a much broader topic for that, which is why we've partnered with Red 8, and to kind of touch base a little bit on who we are and what we do from our respective companies. Red 8, as you may or may not know, we are primarily a consulting services organization that also has a lot of relationships with OEMs, so we can help identify and articulate and build the best design solution, irrespective of OEM, that brings to bear the capabilities that you need. We are one of 5 companies that focus solely on the end-to-end life cycle around infrastructure and everything that you might need that infrastructure for, with regards to consulting services, product purchasing, leasing, temporary facilities like remote data centers, or temporary data centers to asset liquidation, destruction, and IT refurbishment capabilities. We are national. We've got offices all over the place. We have people sitting in 17 locations. We are independently owned and operated and run the largest privately financed IT leasing services company, with about 1.2 billion in assets under management. With that, I'll turn it over to Ben to give a brief overview of who Digital Shadows is. Go ahead, Ben.
Hey, thanks, Brandon. So like Brandon, I started off in the infrastructure side sometime back in '96 as a network administrator, and then kind of went through those ranks of systems administration, Unix side, to database administration. Then I eventually switched over to InfoSec at Morgan Stanley, and kind of stuck there since, I guess, the last about 20 years. So anyway, I won't bore you guys too much with these slides. Digital Shadows, we're basically, well, we are the market leader in digital risk protection. We identify unwanted exposure, protect against external threats, and we minimize digital risk. That's kind of our catchphrase. Basically, think of us as your external information security and business risk team. So what does that really mean? It's, we do brand protection, so that can include impersonating domains, impersonating subdomains, impersonating other companies trying to impersonate you or bad actors, protecting your brand, looking at things that maybe are fraudulent type things out there on the web. I mean, we really quite across the entire open, deep, and dark web. So that includes technical data leakage, attack surface monitoring, so things like your certificates, your exposed ports, pretty much taking a look at you from the outside as your internal InfoSec would look at you internally. Hit the next slide. So basically, how does this work? We sit there and depending on whether it's our closed sources team or other intelligence teams, and including our platform, we're out there kind of like your Google, but InfoSec wise, scrubbing, the entire net. We're looking at GitHub, we're looking at source code repositories, we're monitoring dark web forums, we're monitoring, and we're maintaining personas in those forums as well. So if you think about something like a dark side, we have people from the closed sources team that actually impersonate or pretend and exist in these dark worlds, pretty much. And we look for things that we've gathered from your business as far as key assets, and we associate risk scores with those. We filter through all that unwanted noise, and in the end, we're providing you with actionable intelligence. That's whether it's takedown options. It's giving you playbooks if you're not familiar with how to take certain things down. We provide you with that information, step-by-step guides. We do API integrations to your SIMs, other information security tools, your service now type solutions, and provide context around all of the threats and information that we've collected, identified, and find relevant to your organization. And then you hopefully can take action. We can provide greater detail behind it, and you can, get rid of the bad guys or find out what's going on and make changes to your programs as you see fit to hopefully improve your security posture in the long run.
So for the next couple of minutes, what I'd like to do, Ben, is sort of go through some of the more interesting headlines that I've found in the industry, things that I think are dramatically impacting the threat landscape from, things that maybe you're not seeing outside of what's made the news. We all know the Colonial Pipeline event has made the news. JBS has now made the news. In smaller regional markets, the state of Oklahoma went offline for weeks after they got hit with a ransomware attack. So all of this is now starting to come top of mind. But what I think is kind of interesting is, as you're thinking about the threat landscape, the way the government and other people in InfoSec are responding. So, one of the things that I thought was interesting, and it was a very subtle subtweet where, DEF CON and members who participate in DEF CON were noting that the DoD is expanding their hacker program. I also saw an interesting article that said, moving forward, the federal government's going to start requiring a cybersecurity component to all grant applications moving forward. And I think, given what we're seeing in states, given what we're seeing at the state and local level, what's your perspective on how you see the government entities that we may interface with from a B2B perspective, or just in general changing regulations or reinforcing regulations that maybe got implemented after 9/11 but have sort of slacked off?
Well, I think to sum it, we're going to see a lot more, is my opinion. I mean, if you look at the history of IT and business information security and things, now that we've had so many years in it, it's not new anymore. We've all made our mistakes, we've all figured things out, put frameworks in place. When you look at something like Sarbanes-Oxley, originally, which applied, to the Fortune 500s or publicly traded companies, but that was some of the initial steps to try to implement policies in regards to enforcing businesses to do business a certain way, reducing risk. Over the years, we've seen more and more policies, guidelines. I expect to see the government, I don't know what they're going to figure out. They got some smart guys in the DoD, but I would expect that we'll start seeing things trickle out. I think they'll probably firstly apply to industry, as far as critical infrastructure type things, but I expect it to expand just because I don't see any of this coming to an end. More and more, if not already, everybody's online. Their businesses are operating outside of the typical, or historical method of centralization. So there's a lot of things that are going to apply to a lot of different industries providing services, across the board. So I fully expect to see additional policy requirements or things from our government.
Yeah, I thought this was an interesting follow-up tweet. For those of you who don't know, the 780th Military Intelligence Battalion is the battalion that actually engages in cyber warfare on behalf of the United States. I thought this was very interesting because it actually coincided with a letter or a newsletter that came across my email today, specifically about threat hunting. But I like this quote. I thought that, to sort of reinforce where the government's position is on this. One thing is clear: ransomware is a national security threat. That's a quote from the current, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. What I thought was interesting was some of the numbers here. 2,400 U.S. public sector entities were affected in 2020, with payments totaling $350 million, a 311% increase from 2019. What I find that's interesting about this is we're seeing a lot of different quotes, and I think I actually have it on one coming up later. But ransomware, I'm finding in some of the customer that I've talked to, and some of our customers that we've helped work through recovering from a ransomware attack, is that it isn't just the criminal element looking for a quick payday, but it's often being dropped by other bad actors to hide or attempt to cover the tracks that they've been inside and operating on your network for an extended period of time. And so by going after things like your backups, by going after your Active Directory systems and things like that, they're attempting to make it as hard as possible to go back in and do the forensics to determine what's been taken. I think this coincides pretty well with what you guys provide, in that if you can understand what might be leaving your facility when you have these bad actors in there for extended periods of time, does that give you the opportunity to effectively look inside and start doing threat hunting internally and proactively go after some of these bad actors before they actually start dropping these ransomware bombs to cover their tracks?
Yeah, you're right, and I think that 350 million is just probably what's a conservative number. I think there's a lot of people, considering the stigma, that don't report ransomware payments. I mean, nobody wants to really do that. So yeah, so one of the goals that we have here, providing that external view that you don't often see without spending a lot of time, resources, is identifying, so since we understand certain aspects of your organization, we collect this asset information, we collect IP ranges, we collect, you name it, there's just a number of things we can collect, configure, and basically use those as keys to start monitoring and learning more about your business and identifying things on, whether it's just stuff that's out there and collected, as our broader collection that's more automated, or whether it's stuff that's scoured from forums in the dark web, or from us basically having personas in some of these cyber criminal gangs. But the idea is, and a lot of times it sucks because maybe you do lose something, maybe some kind of document slipped through your digital risk protection type systems or DLP. We can at least take that information, give you context about it, and either explain that your DLP system, and this is from providing that context looking from the inside back out and vice versa, but was that system successful? If it was, right, then where did this document come from? It had to come from somewhere. Was it because of loose policies? Was it because of some new cloud application service or something that you started using? Or was it somebody that just copied something and published it up on Facebook or wherever it's at. But I think it goes two ways. We can, from looking from the outside in, I mean, if you think about some of the pen testing type stuff, that's kind of the goal there. Pen test is a little bit different. But pen test, you got these guys that are kind of pretending to be bad guys. They're looking for exploits. They're trying to get into your systems, find weaknesses. We do that at a broader scale. It's not so much targeting your business. We understand what's out there publicly, but we can associate that with risks in your business and provide run books basically on how you can start mitigating that stuff, and even taking it, a little further. If your infosec team if you have an infosec team and they're actually, doing threat hunting and whatnot, they can leverage our platform. They get a lot of that same information that we get from the dark web and from our closed sources team. They can understand who some of these bad actors are and what their targets are. Right? We're not going to see. DarkSide might have said they've gone away. It's just one of the most recent groups. I think they only said they went away because they got so public, and they got the wrath of the U.S. government basically by that pipeline attack. So, they want to take their money and run before they get some, black ops team type thing. But these guys don't go away. They generally move to different groups, or they just change their names. They change their monikers. They change their focus a little bit. Some of them like to say, like DarkSide likes to say that, they're ethical ransomware type people. It's kind of weird to say that, but they're like, we're not going to attack hospitals. We're not going to attack this stuff. They're trying to give themselves, a little separation between what could happen from a government like ours taking action, on them, make themselves look a little bit better. But in the end, they don't necessarily, from what I've seen, even stay within those groups. You'll find some of these guys that do side jobs, basically. They might be part of this dark side thing, but because of their resources, especially when it comes to ransomware or the payloads they push out, they use them elsewhere. And we're starting to see activity. Well, we have seen it, but we're seeing even more of this activity where it's not necessarily government sponsored. It's a little hard to figure that out. I think that goes to, trying to cover potentially, and we can get into these bigger details, but if you're a targeted attack from a government agency, say, you're going to want, like Brandon was saying, using something as a diversion, because your goal isn't necessarily to get some ransomware payment in that situation. The goal is to, identify back-end systems. What does this company do? Do I want to take control of industrial control systems, or do I want access to SAP? Do I want access to their ERP systems? Do I get some gain there? Or is there a bunch of information I want to get an exfiltrate? And in that case, they have a different plan attack. But anyways, they're being seen, not just sponsored by government entities, which is again hard to prove, but we see even cartel sponsoring some of these little loose knit group of black hats, if that's what you want to call them, and they're starting to go after everybody. I mean, a little money here, a little money there. I mean, some of them, you'd be surprised at how little they sell information for sometimes on some of these more open forums. But it's an interesting world out there.
Yeah, it's in reading some of the things, I find your point about how little they sell some of this stuff for. I mean, it's definitely a numbers game. Last time I looked, I think a social security number went for like $2 or something like that. I mean, it's not about it's definitely a quantity over quality kind of thing, and letting other people deal with it.
Where you get bigger dollars sometimes is, we'll see people selling credential packs, or they'll even go so far sometimes as maybe it's just this is a non-organized type group, but you'll find these one-off hacker type black hats, who knows where they're at. They're against some of these more open forums, but they've hacked some system out there. Like maybe they don't have the newest zero-day ransomware to push out because they just aren't that capable and they don't have those connections, but they go and, basically scan somebody's network, same as a pen test. They find services that are exploitable. They hack into those, they do some reconnaissance, and then they basically publish a little, hey, here's access into this organization, start your bids.
Well, yeah, and it's a good segue about the access into organizations. When I was alluding a little bit earlier about um, just how long people have been inside, this was released earlier this month, maybe about 2 weeks ago. The CEO for SolarWinds, just now figured out that his hack and their system had been compromised at least since January of 2019. Um, Again, kind of going back to, what does it take, and how did they, the kind of work that was necessary to come in forensically and take a look at their systems, their environments to determine that. And I think, while SolarWinds wasn't necessarily hit by a ransomware attack to protect it, you can see, just given what they did and how they're interfaced with other companies, what the risk to, when you're looking at SaaS models, when you're looking at B2B, even when you're looking at simple things like, I can speak for ourselves, we have a very stringent security compliance and training model that we go through because, quite frankly, you guys on the phone, our customers are demanding of us that we're continuing to provide the best security metrics that we possibly can to ensure that financial data is protected as we can do business with our customers. Our customers' names are protected. If they're relying on us from a security perspective to cover that. Sorry, was there a question?
Yeah, I thought I heard something too.
No questions. That was
Okay.
a mute problem.
No worries. So what I think is interesting in this, especially with a lot of these attackers having been, inside these companies for a long period of time, I was reading, and I'm curious what you guys have seen. APIs are becoming a very, very frequent target, particularly for any software development. Most auditors today are finding that APIs are either completely unprotected and unsecured or colossally over authorized. That would be my first thing. And then the second one that stood out to me was that only about 8% of manufacturers are currently implementing things like any sort of remote or reputation monitoring systems to ensure that their APIs aren't being compromised and aren't being sold today. Based on your experience, what are you seeing around that in particular?
Well, that's a good point. So, a big piece of what we have been doing is monitoring for exposed access keys to APIs. So that comes to play depending on the organization. Like you mentioned, if there's a lot of development going on, they're using GitHub, GitLabs, a number of these different source code sharing type sites, and you'd be surprised how often it's not necessarily it's not a malicious activity, but whenever there's developers involved, it seems like there is exposed access keys. They're uploading source code with hard-coded passwords and credentials in them. And this is all mistakes. This is just somebody thinking, okay, we're going to share something, we're going to do it quick. It's the developer way of doing things in a lot of cases. Security is not the first thing on their mind, unfortunately. And they publish all sorts of information in source files and other things that are really easy for other entities to go and scour for, because that stuff's open. It might not be as quick as we can go through it because of all our integrations to things like GitHub, but we do see a lot of exposed credentials and exposed access keys to APIs. So there's a lot of activity in that space for pretty much your initial entry point into an organization. And unfortunately, they're not always, that this group of bad actors is so broad in their intentions that, again, it's like those forums where they're more open and people are just selling, dollar security or social security cards or dollar credit cards. They're selling some of these exposed keys or whatever, and then they just hit it in mass, right? They don't assume that they're going to target anything. They just got this information. They don't care If you're, Morgan Stanley, or if you're Digital Shadows in these cases, they just get exposed keys, exposed credentials, and then they leverage them, as a way in at a later point. And sometimes those people, going back to the SolarWinds, if you think about Target too, people, if they're targeted, they're usually sitting in their dwelling a lot longer. If you're not targeted, though, depending on the person, they may just get in and want to do some reconnaissance and see where they take it from there. And then, it's sky's the limit at that point. Do you turn into a ransomware type situation, or do you turn into something, like a SolarWinds, where it's much broader? And you see that also with a lot of MSSPs recently. Similar to SolarWinds, people are going in. They know that SolarWinds is used all over the place by a number of different organizations. MSSPs are another great spot to get into, because so many people outsource info security these days that they hope to find some access into an MSSP. The MSSPs generally have a whole lot of access to those other internal entities they provide services for. So it's an interesting, complicated world. But yeah, we do see a lot in regards to exposed access keys, API problems, source code, things like that.
Yeah, I remember actually one of the first meetings that I had with you guys under Digital Shadows. I believe Maria was sharing a pretty cool story about one of your customers who was developing a new piece of software, and you guys discovered that one of their APIs, their security key, had made it actually out onto the dark web for sale, and that by catching it, they were able to actually proactively go fix the software, knew about it ahead of time, still met their commitments to the board, so there wasn't a delayed project at all, but it was rolled out, secured, and they took the time to understand what was going on and actually what was lost. I thought that was a really interesting use case about a real world business impact of a delay in this software release was going to have a tangible impact to their bottom line, a tangible impact to potentially their stock price. And then by being able to understand where they were compromised, rather than exacerbating a potentially negative issue by releasing an unsecured patch when they were already committed for something, they were able to do so in a very secure way right out of the get-go, and by being able to proactively know and at least have some visibility into where they had been compromised. And like you said, it isn't always necessarily that somebody hacked you in a lot of cases, because it came back to just convenience on GitHub. There was a very interesting FBI statistic I read a while back that said like 95% of all identity theft cases actually had nothing to do with you being hacked, quote unquote, but was usually the result of poor business practices. People doing something for convenience and leaving PII information or SPII information in an unsecured Excel spreadsheet because it made their job temporarily easier, and that nobody really hacked it. They just walked in and pulled a piece of paper off a desk or something like that and used it for nefarious purposes. So it isn't that you're always necessarily being compromised in that way. It's a good way to understand when just your processes internally for how you're developing and what you're developing, are they secure enough, and are you potentially compromised from a process perspective?
Yep, and that goes to where we mitigate more risk, and where it's I think a better story, than finding out sooner than the media that you got compromised from monitoring some, dark forum or dark net, closed sources type stuff. That nobody wants to hear that. It's still better than knowing, hearing it on the news to get that information sooner. But a lot of what we can mitigate, and where companies see a lot of value, is seeing that things based on just poor practices have been released publicly. And fortunately, in a lot of cases, we find it before the random person finds it and decides to sell it or use it. So it does allow for organizations to understand how something got exposed. Again, whether or not that had any direct impact from existing controls they put in place, or whether those were successful. But to take a bigger look at things and how things are changing, especially with all the SaaS stuff, what do we need to do as an organization policy-wise or control-wise to keep some of these things from happening again. And, we can't always necessarily keep them from happening. So, the sooner we can let somebody know about something that's critical to them, the quicker they can remove it. Hopefully that's, able to be done. And I think it is in most cases, especially when it comes to, exposed access keys and credentials and things, it gets taken care of and then mediated on the back end before it becomes a big issue. I think it provides a lot of value to organizations, at least from my perspective, when you can take those steps and know that you kind of dodged a bullet.
So when you say it's mediated on the back end, what are some of the things that you're seeing by being able to understand this, proactively? How are you able to mitigate this other than just securing what you already have? Are there, other things that you can do? We talked a little bit, or you talked a little bit about brand impersonation, and we've seen a big uptick, particularly in the healthcare space, about fake front end pay sites for hospitals and things like that. How do you guys help, and what do you do to mitigate, when you start to see your brand being replicated on the web?
So brand, at the top level, I think it covers quite a bit. Brand, I think it comes to people's mind initially as, I don't want somebody making fake products, putting a website up that looks like mine. Maybe it's some manufacturing company in China and they're, using some name similar and they're making Nike shoes or something. There's that. Obviously, from a legal perspective and from a brand perspective, you don't want that happening. It can also go to, in the manufacturing world, when I was part of Harman International, we did a lot of outsourcing. We had, it was a global organization. And in a lot of cases, we had to go on our own to try to find out how things were being copied, sold, subpar products. It's always a concern in those cases. But it goes a little further. If you go outside of just the brand and impersonated products and things that just kind of soil your reputation from a business perspective and brand perspective, it moves into this line of phishing potentially, and trying to do basically the beginnings of doing targeted attacks, or not necessarily targeted. Well, they're mostly targeted when they're actually looking at your domains, making these things up. But they use them for a lot of different purposes. Some of those purposes can be make a website that looks just like your HR portal and let people apply for jobs, but you ask them for a bunch of different questions. They give up all sorts of different information. They let them do things like, oh, hey, create your account, log in here, do whatever. But they, coerce people into doing things through these impersonating domains that, can gain access to a system. So it's further than just doing, having impact to brand. But in the end, it does have an impact to brand, because whether it's somebody impersonating, Morgan Stanley or whoever's HR portal, that its intent is to get access into their systems, it in the end tarnishes the brand anyway, because people say, oh, hey, we applied here, or we submitted this information. You guys didn't do anything about it. What's going on? I think, it goes across the board.
So one of the last two core subjects, and then definitely want to open it up to more outside questions. I thought this was very interesting. Leslie Carhart's kind of a staple in the InfoSec community. She's a very prolific blogger, and I thought these two tweets from her were pretty interesting. I keep seeing tweet after tweet lately from my fellow incident responders about preparing for and deterring ransomware attacks, and they're not kidding. Things are escalating fast, including the brazenness, cruelty, and quantity. This is the biggest part that I thought was interesting. Insurers will only pay out when they must. I think that I kind of touched on some of this, but I think, cyber insurance, number one, and I'll kind of jump down to the second part here in a second. But to me, I think when you look at cyber insurance, I think too many customers that I talk to are relying on it like, well, that's okay, I have insurance. And I think, we're getting to a stage kind of like in a car accident now where insurers are only ever going to pay out if they absolutely have to, especially given the proliferation of this. And costs that I've seen for cyber insurance are skyrocketing. Where do you guys view, the impact of cyber insurance? Is it a bigger catch-all? Is it more of a piece that you can look at to help mitigate? What's your kind of view on the whole cyber insurance perspective? Because I think two things are going to happen. I think number one, it's going to start becoming mandated more frequently in more places, kind of like car insurance is with driving. But number two, I think your ability to actually use it or rely on it in any substantive way is going to continue to decline.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll give you a couple different perspectives. Cyber insurance, I first started, really, really diving into that and looking at it from when I was at an MSSP, or a managed detection and response organization, because we were looking at ways of saying, if you're paying for cyber insurance, can we, cyber insurance premiums may go down if you have, some certified managed security services provider. How can we, kind of leverage the costs, make things reasonable for you based on that? What I've seen over the years is the cyber insurance, it doesn't really pay out. It's really tight net wording around taking the appropriate measures to prevent that. So if you read the T's and C's, it's going to be things like, we're not going to pay out on a ransomware incident if you didn't implement the proper disaster recovery procedures and have the proper backups, to actually recover from this. So to your point, they find any way they can not to pay. That happened in the MSSP's side of the house when we would see somebody gets hacked, whether it became public or not. They go to their cyber insurance provider and they say, hey, look, we got, compromised. Maybe it wasn't ransomware, but the cyber insurance people usually say, well, let's take a look at your policies and procedures internally. And if you didn't have the right controls in place, and they get pretty deep into this stuff, they don't pay out. I think you're right. We're going to see more and more of it being a requirement. I think it's going to turn into, something where it's not quite as expensive, but it is more of a mandatory thing. And they'll probably give some discounts here and there, basically to incentivize people to, implement additional controls or different, partner with different people in regards to security risk prevention. But it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. I think it will be more like car insurance, but it's, it doesn't pay out. Not when you're paying, $4.5 million for a ransomware thing, and you can't show that you took every possible measure to prevent that from happening. So I guess we're not going to see any payments, to that pipeline.
Yeah. Well, the part to this that I thought was interesting, because I almost felt like this should have been the lead-in tweet in her thread. She points out the fact that really nobody, irrespective of your size of business, is free from this. And I thought it was very interesting too. I was in a conversation with one of our OEMs the other day about some of the infrastructure plays that they offer to their customers around protecting against ransomware. And what was interesting to me was they were telling me that actually the number one place that they're seeing demand for their solution was actually in K through 12, which just tells me and kind of reinforces that bottom point that she's making, that it doesn't matter who you are. And you've touched on it obliquely, and when you're saying they just do these mass hacks to just figure out what they can get from a credentialized perspective, because we all know that we as human beings are also inherently lazy and use the same password for 87 different websites. Nobody is too small to be hit by this, because you have information that they can sell in mass. And, when you look across your customer base, how prevalent do you see that? And then I have a follow-on question for your earlier statement around disaster recovery that I want to touch on. But I'm curious about your take on the bottom part of her thread there.
So I think there's a couple things happening right now, and I think they're comparable to other issues. Like I mentioned earlier, we're seeing more cartel organized crime stuff spinning up recently, where I think they're trying to take advantage of what's potentially to come, right? I think people in that in that dark, the black hats and whatnot, they understand that there's policies coming. Going back to our other topic, they understand that governments may start cracking down more on this. They understand that people are probably going to start putting more controls in place. So I think, to her first piece of the tweet is there's reason for people to be more concerned, now, especially when they're not organization, in aerospace or something where there's, some secret sauce somebody really wants to get. It's now just going to broad mass scale. People want to spam it basically. It's like going to old spam days. Just hit as many things as you can, try to take advantage of it before things get harder. So we're going to see, an uptick in reasons people want to, or to think that this is going to happen to them. There's people running around. I don't want to say the sky's falling, but I think we're going to see, and we do see, a big increase in just more random attacks. Again, it's those, they don't necessarily, like back in, if I think back 15 years or so ago, maybe it was only, that's probably 15 years, but I was at a DEF CON one year, and there was some people from a cartel south that approached a few people I know, and they were, even back then, trying to recruit people for active targeted hacking. Mostly what they were looking to do was to have somebody, help build encrypted systems in their data centers, run their data centers, set up encrypted radio systems. And then a lot of their interest was in targeting financial institutions, so they can get access to creating accounts or siphoning money, et cetera. But that, then with the cartel involvement was definitely a targeted type thing. It's kind of a in the back end. And today we can still see some of that in our organization, but it's the one-offs. They're looking at some customer of ours or something, and it's because maybe they're in like engineering of some kind or aerospace of some kind, and they want to get certain data, or it's a financial company. But we're seeing more and more of this where it's not that targeted way. It's a more of a, set a base fee, spam it, hit every person you possibly can with an online presence, and get what you can out of it. Once you get something out of it, or if you do happen to run across something a little more important, then it's a bidding war type thing. I mean, that's at least from the perspective I see from the closed sources and the discussions happening in the back end, and also based on what kind of alerts we're raising, when it comes to brand and to technical leakage and just things of that nature.
So the follow up around disaster recovery, because this is one area where I do think infrastructure guys do really have an opportunity to help fully flesh out, not just provide virtual systems that support tools that you might be using to run a SIM or that your SOC is supporting, but as you look at sort of like the major areas of cybersecurity, right? You've got informational security, network, operational security, application security. These are kind of the things that most, CISOs really hone in and focus on. End user education is obviously a big part, but I think business continuance and a business continuance strategy plays a huge part in this. And you brought it up around, do you have the disaster recovery capabilities in place? And I think that business continuance capability is one of those areas where the infrastructure team needs to get brought into the conversation more. Again, not just for providing systems that run the tools, but for providing a comprehensive process to be able to retain your information, protect those assets, protect them in an uncompromised or uncorruptible way at some level, whether you're doing air-gapped backups or you're writing certain core things to worm drives that can't get erased or whatever it is. Do you think that part of the conversation is being brought in enough, or is it kind of a sidebar that you think is just ransomware focused? Like, where do you feel that plays in the broader discussion?
Well, I have a unique perspective coming from, very large multinational organizations where I was part of the BCDR, Business Continuity Disaster Recovery team, from from the perspective of your typical infrastructure, knowing, the database systems, the backend, how they communicated, what kind of data was on those systems. It's absolutely necessary if you can get everybody involved, because that business continuity piece and a proper BCDR plan, involves the infrastructure guys, their knowledge that is not necessarily something known by the people that run the business components to it. But in a comprehensive BCDR plan, you have, your risk people, you have your finance people, you have everybody from some part of the business involved in this comprehensive plan, where you can, leverage the information from each individual groups. It helps everybody understand, where gaps are, whether it goes to providing those backups, worm drives, whatever. It's unfortunately not being done enough outside of organizations that are very large. I think when you start seeing, organizations that are even, less than a few hundred people, it's one person running it, or it's a copy and paste type BCDR plan. It's not really diving so deep into what's really a risk to the business and the supporting systems behind that, and where you need to leverage people in infrastructure, across the board, understanding the business better. I think, a lot of people overlook the value that an infrastructure person can provide when it comes to business risk. So I would encourage every organization, if you haven't already done, some sort of high-level BCDR, but try to take it a step further and do bring, most of the organization in and try to educate, the infrastructure guys. And the infrastructure guys should be educating even the InfoSec and other types of guys on, how these systems work in the back end. How are you really going to protect it? What do we need to make business decisions around risk, or is it, a combination of things? Is it a set of different tools? Bottom line, it's not being done enough. I think people think about it a lot. Mostly they think about it, though, in that ransomware sense right now. I think everybody just thinks, backup, copy it off, do it as fast as possible, keep clones of virtual machines, do whatever so you can recover as quick as possible. But, that's one step in the right direction, but I think it should be taken to be a more comprehensive BCDR plan, where it does involve more than just, a couple people making those decisions.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think it's definitely a bi-directional conversation. One of my stories that I've often shared with some folks was, when you think about where are the lines of communication between the CISO in that person's office and then the infrastructure guys, right? There's nothing worse, and this happened to me, than being in the middle of a project and having somebody from the security team walk up and go, well, you can't do this. And I'm like, I can't do what? And he proceeded to explain a thing. And I looked at him dead in the face and I said, okay, so you're telling me that the crux of this $30 million project that we're $15 million into is going to get killed for a security policy? Which security policy? Well, I don't know. We haven't written it yet, but you're violating one of the principles that we want to enact moving forward. Yeah, and you want to talk about turning that whole thing around and it being a colossal mess for everybody in the organization, and some rapid business decisions, as you so eloquently put it, having to be made pretty quick.
Yeah, it's all about risk to the business. I mean, I think in the end, we have, as IT people in general, InfoSec guys included, InfoSec guys have their own issues. Sorry about that. But anyway, we all have our problems in IT. We know IT guys, we kind of hold our feet to the ground in certain cases. What we need to remember is what the business wants, what's acceptable risk to the business. Understand the business a little better, because going to your point, if you're in the middle of a project, it's not necessarily the InfoSec guy says no. It's more of a conversation then of how much do we put into it? What is our return? It's all about making money, in our companies. That's what we all are here for. Same with the guys that employ us. They want to make money, and there's such a thing as acceptable risk. Right? So that's the conversations we need to have more of. Everybody. It would be great to have everything just locked down tight. Zero privilege, or privilege zero, basically, or least privilege access. But that doesn't necessarily work. You have to, maybe you embrace GitHub. A lot of people do, right? Maybe you need that. Maybe you need outsourced code development teams. So those are acceptable risks you take as a business. You say, what is my exposure when you look at that? And do I have the proper visibility into that kind of exposure? Is it worth spending money on other controls or monitoring components to mitigate that risk. But in the end, doing business is risky. It comes down to, what is an acceptable level of risk, and we all should try hard to make it so that there is as little risk as possible. Understanding the business and maybe being a little more flexible in some cases, along with a lot of other information from the outside, helps.
So this is the last one I'm going to lead with because I thought this was very interesting. Scott Stewart is a former InfoSec guy I've known for quite a while, and he runs a company that specifically works on working with businesses around threat protection. And I thought this was really interesting because it's an area that we tend to overlook in how we educate our own end user employees. And he basically just says those seeking to protect their organizations and the people within them against criminal, physical, or reputational threats, which I thought was very interesting that he highlighted that and put it in with the criminal and physical as being equal. Must understand social media apps and learn how to properly use social media monitoring, or find a partner who can provide that capability. I think as companies, we talk and we talk frequently about, what is the impact to our reputation when a system goes down and somebody can't order something, and do I lose a percentage of customers, or do I risk losing them, or do I risk a hit to my reputation? And I think that reputation extends into that social media space, not just from how well are you actively able to monitor it, but are you from somebody who's looking like a digital shadows, or are you even extending your customer service into that space? I know for me, for example, if I have my GPS activated on my phone and I tweet something to United because I've got just shy of 2 million miles on them, it happens to click up that I'm at an airport when I tweet it. It's amazing the kind of response that I get from those guys versus if I just call the 1-800 number. But I think, that's kind of more of an extreme from a customer service perspective, but from a genuine brand reputational perspective, between anything from false reviews to ex-employees trashing the company and whatnot. I think having something robust to monitor that is, and I'll leave with this because we've got about 5 minutes left. I think something like that becomes more and more important and will continue to become more important over time. I think it's even more so as you look at, there's been some recent studies that with the rise of the internet and everything else, the reality is most customers, something to the tune of about 80% of them, make their buying decision before they ever enter or engage with who they want to make that purchasing decision from. In other words, whether it's meeting a sales rep or walking into a van store or whatever it is, over 80% of the people out there that are making buying decisions have made that decision before they ever interface with your company, whether that's a bank, whether you're manufacturing, whether it's whatever you're doing. Even on our side, have you done the research to understand what our company is and who our company is, and are you willing to work with us or yourselves? Those decisions are made long before they ever meet with sales folks.
Yep.
So it becomes, to me, I think it becomes more and more important to start thinking about that as a company. Doesn't mean you have to take it as far as a United or even Uber are doing, with it being a primary area of customer support and customer satisfaction. But I do think understanding that reputational impact can be just as impactful to a business as having your order entry website go down for your online business. Last 5 minutes, any closing thoughts for you, Ben? Any questions from chat or anybody else out there that wants to throw anything last minute?
I did want to mention that there was a chat sent from Dasha. They made a comment. That's a great point. This makes it more complex when people work from home. Policies and procedures should be reviewed.
100%. I could
Yes.
not agree more.
Yep, we've exposed ourselves to. I've done some previous webinar type discussions, which have been around, the remote worker. That's why we have a remote worker bundle, basically, is because over the last year we've just seen an explosion in adopting numerous tools that out there that allow us to share information. I think it's also contributed to the mass growth of social media and more, where people are leveraging it like a kind of like a new broad internet, where it's not just your website that gets hacked, it's somebody on social media impersonating you, or et cetera. It's very complex, but yes, absolutely should be reviewed with all the changes.
Yeah, and it's not going to go away. I think that right, wrong, or indifferent, irrespective of your opinion on remote working, I think an aspect of that's here to stay, and the hybrid workforce is going to enter in mass, and that brings a lot of new challenges to bear. Everything from whether it's logistical challenges and getting systems to the right people, to ensuring that they're protected when they're working from home. And quite frankly, it'll be very interesting to see. This is just a hypothesis of mine. As work from home really becomes more and more of a thing, and companies look at different models to support that with, whether it's VDI instantiations or whatnot, can you protect your workers' home environment? And are you going to look to do that over time? Will become very interesting. So, with that, we've got about a couple minutes left. If there's nothing else, I would like to say thank you very much for everybody's time. We really appreciate you coming on. We hope this was informative. Please, by all means, give us your honest feedback in the questionnaire so that we can get better at this. I believe very strongly that fundamentally all positive feedback is effectively no feedback. So please let us know where we can be better at this. It's hugely important. Ben, closing comments, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, no, thanks everybody for attending. Please feel free to reach out to Red 8 or directly to Digital Shadows if you have any questions, or even to myself. I guess the information is shared as far as contact, so feel free.
Yep, and I just entered the survey link into the chat, so let us know your thoughts, and we appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you.